The varying interests and motivations of men and women are often set at odds in inflammatory and explosive ways. Mob rule has often led men down divergent paths. In some instances, new nations are formed. In others, these same nations are torn apart. Join us as we examine the motives, causes, and effects of gangs, gangsters, and the mob. In the Caribbean island settlements and the colonial Americas of the early 1700s, pirates threatened merchant and military ships alike, pillaging a ship's cargo, killing its crew, and sinking those ships themselves. Between 1700 and 1720 began the period known as the Golden Age of piracy. Spain, France, Great Britain, and other European nations held colonies and ports in the Caribbean and the Americas during these years, which proved to be tumultuous back in their respective home countries. As wars raged back home, the hostilities also brought violence to the New World. Naval and merchant ships were pillaged and destroyed, and shipwrecked sailors soon turned to a life of piracy. In terms of period of activity and sheer numbers of ships captured, Bartholomew Roberts was one of the most successful pirates of this golden age. Roberts was third mate on a slave ship, the Princess, when, in 1719, the vessel was captured off the Gold Coast of Africa by pirates under the leadership of Captain Howell Davis. Davis discovered in Roberts a talent for navigation and began to consult his prisoner on such matters. Roberts was at first hesitant to join the crew of the pirate ship and was reportedly a teetotaler, preferring tea and coffee to rum and beer. However, when Roberts saw the amount of fairness, democracy, and shared wealth at work on the pirate ship, which was not found in the British Navy, Roberts changed his tune.
In an honest service, there's thin commons, low wages, and hard labor. In this, plenty and satiety, pleasure and ease, liberty and power, and who would not balance creditor on his side? When all is hazard that is run for it, and worse is only a sour look or two choking. Now, a merry life and a short one shall be my motto.
A few weeks later, the pirate ship Royal Rover was attacked by the Portuguese Navy, and Captain Davis was killed. When it came time to elect a new captain, the crew decided in favor of Bartholomew Roberts. The General History of Pirates notes that Roberts responded,
Since I've dipped my hands in muddy water, must be a pirate. It is better to be a commander than a common man.
Less than 6 weeks after his capture, Roberts was now captain of the pirate ship Rover. It appeared as though Roberts was destined to be a pirate, and history came to dub Captain Roberts Black Bart. He led his crew through adventures in the treacherous waters off of Brazil, Newfoundland, and the Caribbean from 1719 to 1721, fighting off an armada of Portuguese ships and bringing trade to a standstill by capturing, pillaging, and destroying any bountiful vessel unfortunate enough to be sailing in the West Indies. They weren't alone. In addition to the battles over territory, both in the West Indies and back in Europe, letters of marque were issued, granting government support to any vessel that volunteered to capture enemy ships. During the War of Spanish Succession, fleets of Spanish, French, and English privateers battled in the Caribbean and off the coasts of South America. Popular targets were Spanish and Portuguese treasure fleets, as well as settlements throughout the islands that were often pillaged for goods and valuables or held ransom for slaves, so to benefit the plantations of the victors' own settlements in the New World. This form of legal piracy was utilized later during the American Revolution, when private ships were authorized to capture British trade and military vessels, and again was used during the American Civil War.
During the late Civil War in America, the executive government undertook the blockade of more than 3,000 miles of coast, and though nothing could exceed the energy and activity of the naval officers so employed, the results were very unsatisfactory, inasmuch as it was not till absolute possession was taken of the forts at the entrance of the great harbors, such as Charleston, Mobile, and Wilmington, that blockade running was stopped. 4 out of 6 of the fast little craft fitted out, some in England, some in New York, succeeded in evading the vigilance of the cruisers. And it is undeniable that the war was prolonged for many months, if not years, by the warlike stores, clothing, provisions, etc., introduced into the southern states by this method.
Augustus Charles Hobart Hampden was a retired British captain who commanded a blockade runner during the American Civil War. He wrote about his exploits in his biography and in a volume called Never Caught, under the pen name of Captain Roberts, which may have been an allusion to famed pirate Captain Bartholomew Roberts. He was reported to have run the blockade more than 15 times successfully, conveying essential goods from England to the blockaded ports of the South, including weapons.
The vessel's cargo consisted of blankets, shoes, Manchester goods of all sorts, and some mysterious cases marked hardware, about which no one asked any questions, but which the military authorities took possession of.
While steamboat captains from the southern United States were preferred for the job, many retired and furloughed British officers hired on for want of adventure and profit. The undertaking was fraught with danger, and Hobart Hampden and his crew narrowly escaped Union detection on several occasions. During the formation and early years of the United States of America, through the 18th, 19th, and early 20th century, men and women throughout the country subverted the laws and mores of their societies with both noble and less than noble intentions. Some individuals even engaged in what we today might call terrorist acts. In the days leading up to the Civil War, the U.S. became a battleground of ideas, with many Americans at odds with one another over one issue: slavery.
On the afternoon of Monday, May 26th, a man came to us at Liberty Hill, his horse reeking with sweat, and said, "5 men have been killed on the Potawatomi, horribly cut and mangled, and they say old John Brown did it." Hearing this, I was afraid it was true, and it was the most terrible shock that ever happened to my feelings in my life. But Brother John took a different view. The next day, as we were on the east side of Middle Creek, I asked Father, "Did you have any hand in the killing?"
Jason Brown wrote of his father, John Brown, and the aftermath of an incident that would change the lives of the Brown family forever. A staunch abolitionist, John Brown led several attacks on slave owners and pro-slavery advocates from 1856 to 1859, many of the battles taking place in the state of Kansas during a pre-Civil War period that came to be known as Bleeding Kansas. On May 21st, 1856, a mob of over 300 people, led by the sheriff of a neighboring county, attacked the settlement of Lawrence, which had been established, inhabited, and governed by anti-slavery advocates. Enraged by the bloodshed, John Brown set out for Lawrence, and on the way captured the homes of two pro-slavery figures, slaughtering them, their family members, and their guests. John Brown, Jr. asked his father if he had any involvement in the incident.
He replied, "I did not, but I do not pretend to say that they were not killed by my order, and in doing so, I believe I was doing God's service." My wife spoke and said, "Then, Captain, you think that God uses you as an instrument in His hands to kill men?" Brown replied, "I think He has used me as an instrument to kill men. And if I live, I think He'll use me as an instrument to kill a good many more."
The attacks throughout Kansas and in other areas, including a failed slave uprising led by Brown in Harper's Ferry, Virginia, which led to John Brown's capture and execution, did little to quell the unease in the country. Mob violence only begat more mob violence. The blood spilled only served to deepen the rift between both sides, and soon the country was embroiled in the Civil War.
About 10 days ago, I retired very late. I had been up waiting for important dispatches from the front. I could not have been long in bed when I fell into a slumber, for I was weary. I soon began to dream. There seemed to be a death-like stillness about me. Then I heard subdued sobs, as if a number of people were weeping. I thought I left my bed and wandered downstairs. There the silence was broken by the same pitiful sobbing, but the mourners were invisible. I went from room to room. No living person was in sight, but the same mournful sounds of distress met me as I passed along. I saw light in all rooms. Every object was familiar to me. But where were all the people who were grieving, as if their hearts would break? I was puzzled and alarmed. What could be the meaning of all this? Determined to find a cause of the state of things so mysterious and so shocking, I kept on until I arrived at the east room, which I entered. There I met with a sickening surprise. Before me was a catafalque, on which rested a corpse wrapped in funeral vestments. Around it were stationed soldiers who were acting as guards, and there was a throng of people, gazing mournfully upon the corpse, whose face was covered, others weeping pitifully. "Who was dead in the White House?" I demanded of one of the soldiers. "The president," was his answer. "He was killed by an assassin."
3 days before President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, he told a friend about what would become a fulfilled prophetic dream. On April 14th, 1865, John Wilkes Booth, incensed over the prospect of freed slaves becoming American citizens, mobilized to assassinate the President of the United States. The plot was born of an earlier attempt to kidnap the president in exchange for the release of Confederate soldiers. When Booth learned of the Confederate surrender and the subsequent emancipation of the slaves, he decided something drastic had to be done for the cause of the Confederacy. In a plot that was also aimed at killing Vice President Andrew Johnson and Secretary of State William Seward, Booth, a well-known actor in that day, entered Ford's Theater with a Derringer pistol on the evening of the 14th.